Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Keefe, Business Advisor here at the World Trade Center, Winnipeg. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that this webinar is coming to you from Treaty 1 territory, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Thank you for joining our webinar, The Art of Small Talk, How to Connect in a Hybrid World, which will be presented to you by Ben Dueck. Before we begin, I want to share a few housekeeping items. Please send all of your webinar questions directly to the chat box at the top of your screen, and Ben will try to answer as many as he can during a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. For all logistical questions, please send them directly to the chat box, and I will answer your questions as soon as possible. And you will also receive a PDF copy and recording of this presentation within the next week or so. And now it's time to start our webinar. I would like to introduce you to Ben Dueck. Ben is passionate about leadership, development, and helping people grow their impact. His past experience includes entrepreneurship, nonprofit leadership, fundraising, and more. He is the Director of Leadership and Sales for Crestcom Manitoba and the President of Cantera Leadership. He's a Gallup Certified Clifton Strengths Coach and has a Master of Arts in Leadership degree. Ben is a born and raised Manitoban who grew up in a family of entrepreneurs where his interest in leadership development was born. For the past 20 years, he has worked with leaders in both the business and nonprofit world to help them be more successful. He currently lives in Niverville with his wife and 3 children. Welcome, Ben. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that introduction. And I'm excited to be here and do this webinar here with all of you who are joining us. I did one about a month ago, and maybe you were here last month and you were part of that session. If you were, good to have you back. I guess I didn't scare you off, and that's good to see you here. Before we jump too far into things, I'm going to actually recruit Paul for a little bit of a quick role play to kick things off when we're talking about the art of small talk, how to connect in a hybrid world. So Paul, I gave him a little heads up that I was going to call on him, but I did not tell him exactly what scenario I was going to throw at him. So Paul, all I want us to do is, it's simple. I just want to have a little bit of a small talk role play here with you, and I want you to kick things off, and let's try to have a little bit of a small talk connection here, Paul. So how about you just imagine we're just bumping into each other at some kind of event or something like that for the first time. You start us off.
Ben, how's it going? I hope you're not an Oilers fan.
Yeah, things are good, Paul.
Yeah, going good? Okay, that's good. But you're not an Oilers fan? You don't like watching the Edmonton Oilers? You like the Winnipeg Jets, I hope?
I don't really watch hockey.
You don't watch hockey? Okay, why not?
I don't know. It's just not my thing.
Oh, interesting. So how are things going?
Good.
Hey, awesome. Well, it's nice to see you, Ben. Take care.
Okay, well, Paul, thanks so much, by the way. Good job. Everyone, if you want to give Paul a round of applause virtually, you can give him a round of applause. What in the chat, I'm curious for those of you who are paying attention there, what did I do badly in that conversation? Pop it in the chat if you have an observation. And what do you think Paul did well with? Okay, so you can, okay, short answers from James. Yeah, so what did Paul, you can put Ben, you can say what I did badly, and you can say, Paul, what do you think Paul did well? I didn't give Paul a lot to work with, right? I mean, that was, so, James, you nailed that. Right? Paul tried to extend the conversation, did well with that. And what else? Anyone else have some thoughts around what did I do poorly? Or did that James maybe just nailed it? Maybe James got both points here. Any other thoughts around it? If you have some thoughts, add them in there, because this is kind of the fun thing about small talk, right? It's it takes more than one person, that's for sure. And I see a few people adding some thoughts in there. So as we're talking about the art of small talk, yeah, I didn't ask any questions back, right? We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Like, how do we engage in really healthy, good conversation and small talk that kind of engages other people? Yeah, I love this, right? So you guys are adding some really good thoughts here for sure. Now, small talk, like it or not, it kind of is inevitable. And it's something that some of you in this room here, if you could avoid it, you would, right? Like, I know it. Some of you here just love it, like you embrace it. And for today, regardless of where you're at in regards to that small talk idea, I really want you to try to think, how can I take one step in becoming more effective at small talk? Because you can't really avoid it. So another question for those of you in the chat, again, pop this in the chat if you've got your chat windows open. How do you feel about small talk? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you avoid it as much as you can? Hate it? Yeah, see, there we go. Let's get some good, honest answers in here. Maybe you're indifferent. Maybe you're like, I don't know. Like, it's kind of awkward, right? Avoid it when I can. Yeah, small talk is just, in general, I think a lot of people feel similar to what we're saying here in the chat. Good as far as it stays small, right? Like if it's different if it gets deeper or further along. Difficult, yeah. I love that, Joyce. I appreciate you sharing that cultural aspect of it, right? That adds a huge layer into these kind of conversations, and we're going to dig into that a little bit later as well. Not in depth, but we're going to touch on that as well. Really appreciate your responses in the chat there. Perhaps you're kind of like Elon Musk. Elon Musk, why is small talk even legal? Right? It's perhaps you resonate with that. Like I said, though, it's something that we can't avoid when it comes to the world that we live in, whether it is at work, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's at some kind of community event, whether you head to, maybe you go to church and you go to church on a Sunday morning and you see it there, whatever the case is, there's small talk in many different places. So Paul already gave me an introduction, so I won't dig into that a lot, but what I will want to do is just give you a quick outline as to the objectives around our time here together today. And we're going to try to keep it in a kind of a tight window of time and leave some room for questions at the end for anyone who has any questions. So we're going to try to define and understand the benefits of small talk, right? So if we can't avoid it, let's understand it and understand why it exists and why it can be helpful. We're going to describe how to navigate small talk more effectively, and then really just apply some tips and techniques to help you prepare for some small talk conversations. So that's where we're going today. We're going to dive into just really defining small talk. And if you would look up kind of a definition of small talk, you might hear people say something like, oh, it's polite conversation. They might even add something and say it's polite conversation about unimportant or uncontroversial matters, especially as engaged in on social occasions. That might be a definition you might hear. You might also hear someone say, a way to fill the silence, right? And Paul did a great job at the beginning, right? He tried to, ask some, although he asked some controversial questions about the Oilers, right? So if I was an Oilers fan, that might have, fired me up a little bit. But in general, he did a good job, right? It's kind of is polite conversation, and we talked about some really uncontroversial types of things. Maybe the Jets or the Oilers are important, but hey, we talked about some things that were a good way of starting things off. And this is a definition from back in 1923. A guy by the name of Malinowski. He said, a great deal of talk does not serve any purpose of communicating ideas, but instead serves to establish bonds of personal union. Because, most people feel, at least a little bit, the need to get comfortable with one another before they jump into the deep end of serious conversation, before they get into real deep ongoing friendship. And even in friendships that are deeper, usually there's still an element of small talk when you first connect with that person or reconnect with that person. Now, Malinowski, that was back in 1923, and kind of starting in the 70s, we've been hearing a little bit different definition or purpose behind what small talk exists for. And we've been finding more and more that small talk actually serves a very important purpose for a whole range of social, commercial, and professional settings. Really what it does is it helps to weave and reweave the social fabric. It helps us to enact and reinforce social roles in many ways. And it's different in different contexts, right? For example, think of some of these examples of when small talk might exist. You think, doctor and patient. The type of small talk or whether there is small talk is very different than if you think of maybe a vendor and a customer. Again, is small talk important? Probably. Does it happen? Probably, but it's going to be very different than the doctor. Employer and employee, maybe best friends since they were kids meeting again versus someone who you've just met recently at a networking event, for example. And like was mentioned, different cultures view things like small talk and silence differently. right? In some cultures, silence is golden. Well, maybe we also think silence is golden in our Canadian culture that we've developed in many different ways, but there's definitely different cultures that view those kind of things in a different way. As we talk about things today, I think a helpful metaphor for kind of considering small talk is I like to think of it of like building a wall with bricks. Okay, so let's imagine building a wall with bricks. And really, our small talk is an opportunity to start putting those bricks together where we build that foundation together. And it's really that foundation where we start building trust, because we know in every relationship, trust is valuable. And so if we can engage in small talk, it actually is this social dynamic of building trust together. And research shows that people who more frequently engage in small talk, even if you identify as an introvert, and we're going to talk about introverts a little bit later, people who do small talk more often end up being happier. Interesting, right? Even for those of you who hate it, potentially, maybe you could be an outlier in the study, I don't know, but potentially small talk may help just build that sense of connection and happiness with others. The short version is that small talk is really the starting point for deeper connection. Now, some of you might think, hey, like, I don't really view small talk that way. Like, if I'm bumping into someone at the grocery store and we engage in small talk, absolutely. Not every time that you're engaging in small talk will lead towards a deeper connection. But we live in a world where we are engaging with people regularly. No matter what your role is, you probably have people around you, whether it's coworkers, whether it's customers, whether it's vendors that you're talking to. And engaging in small talk with them can help you build a better connection. It may not be a deeper connection for the purpose of like, I'm going to share all my childhood trauma with you, right? Because that may not be the situation that you're trying to lead towards, but it might be we're having a deeper connection of trust so you can either have better business relationships or better personal relationships moving forward. Okay, so as we continue to talk about things, I want to cover a little bit of some of the benefits of small talk, right? Because we've talked about it a little bit, and also some of the myths of small talk. So when I look at the benefits of small talk and just to encourage you with it, these are some of the things that they found in different studies. We talked about happiness already, but when you do small talk, it can help with confidence. Some people who are shy might feel that's a hard one to wrap your head around, and that's okay. It's not going to be the same for everyone. These are some of the benefits, not always the benefit for everyone. Sometimes it's just building that connection. Sometimes it relates to productivity, right? If you have that level of trust being built through small talk, you may actually be able to be more productive alongside that person or with that person. Or if in the world of sales, some of you might be in the world of sales, when you have a good connection with someone, you may have a more likely chance to have a sale. Small talk can actually help mitigate conflict, right? Because you're building that foundation of trust. And I've said trust a few times, so that's on here as well. Relationships, building relationships, learning, profitability, all these kind of areas, raising social IQ being the sense of how do I relate to other people, right? Emotional intelligence would be another word you can use there as well. So we know that when we engage in small talk, it has some of those benefits. Now, myths of small talk, and these maybe some of these myths you've adopted in your own approach to small talk, and some people just say, hey, small talk is insignificant. It doesn't really matter. But really, we know, we just talked about it, it's really that foundation, right? Foundation for building trust, foundation for building relationships. It can lead towards deeper discussions, better opportunities, both personally and professionally. Myth, small talk should always stay light and superficial. In reality, it often starts there, right? It begins with light topics, but it can naturally progress to more substantial subjects. Right? Genuine interest and active listening can help navigate towards deeper conversations, especially when you engage with small talk with someone over time. Like Paul and I have had a few conversations, and we've talked about some things that aren't just about the Jets and the Oilers at times too, right? Because we've progressed in some of our conversations. A myth, small talk is a waste of time. Reality, small talk can be that groundwork that you lay for networking, collaboration, relationship building, and some of those things are crucial for personal and professional growth. Here's a good myth. Extroverts are naturally better at small talk. Reality, both extroverts and introverts can excel at small talk. It's more about effective communication. It's more about learning how to listen, how to do active listening, and adapting to the situation. In fact, some extroverts can be terrible at small talk because they're just so focused on trying to get their own perspective shared rather than, again, bouncing a little bit back and forth. Another myth, small talk should always be positive and agreeable. Well, maybe. Authenticity, though, is key in small talk. We want to be able to share genuine thoughts with each other. and that can help lead towards more meaningful interactions. You need to be charming and witty to succeed at small talk. In reality, humor can help, but really that active listening that I talked about, asking open-ended questions, showing genuine interest are more important than being able to be charming and witty in those conversations. And the last myth that I'll share, small talk doesn't require preparation. One of the things that I want you to take away from our time here today is what can you do to prepare for the next time you're going to be having some small talk, right? What can you do to be more effective in those situations? Because as you go into those situations, you want to be able to be more effective. And so let me cover some small talk mistakes, and we'll go through these pretty quickly as well. And some of these you may have seen in my interaction with Paul. No self-disclosure or talking too much about yourself. Either way. So for me, that was the mistake I made. I wasn't really doing any self-disclosure. I was just giving short answers, which comes up as well a little bit later. Being critical instead of curious. I love that mistake, right? In the sense that when someone engages in a conversation, instead of being curious and asking more questions to hear what the other person's perspective is, you are often just kind of being critical and analyzing what they're saying. And maybe that comes through in how you interact. Interrupting, right? I should have done that one when Paul and I did our role play. I should have just interrupted him and did something different, right? That can be a mistake that we make. The word pitch slapping, maybe you've heard of this before, right? Using small talk just as an opportunity to also now just jump in and say, hey, have you heard about what I have to sell at my place of business? I think you really need this in your life, when it's not being ready for that part of the conversation. Talking about controversial topics can be dangerous in small talk, right? How about that, Israel-Hamas war, right? Whoa, that just brought the room down in this virtual room already, right? Just bringing that up. Imagine now trying to do that in small talk. Probably a risky thing to be doing in those situations. Another mistake, not having anything to say, right? We need to be at least ready to talk about something. How can we prepare ourselves to be ready for that? Waiting for someone else to take the lead. Right? If you're just sitting there, maybe you've joined a virtual meeting room sometime and you're just like, everyone, there's like 8 of you, you all join the meeting room. The meeting is like 3 minutes away from starting and everyone's just quiet. Everyone's just waiting for someone else to take the lead, right? Kind of that awkward silence that potentially might be there. And number 8, this one, not hitting the ball back. The metaphor I love when it comes to small talk is a game of tennis, right? A game of tennis becomes really boring if the person you're playing against doesn't even try to hit it back. That's not really tennis, right? Small talk can be very similar to that. Paul hit the ball with me a few times in that conversation, and I did not hit that ball back to him. I didn't engage and really answer his question. I didn't ask him any questions. I didn't give him a chance to get this rally going. And when we get that rally going, that's where we start to see this sweet spot of small talk. A good way of doing that, and Paul did a great job of this, Paul. So I'm picking on you a lot here, but don't ask yes or no questions, right? Try to ask questions that go beyond just did you have a good day today, right? That's a yes or no, other than saying, hey, like, what's been good about your day so far? Right? Very different way of asking the same question, or trying to get to the same purpose. So here's a question for all of you in the chat. I want to keep you interacting because I don't want you tuning out too much. Is what small talk mistakes do you see people making the most? I'd love to see some answers in the chat. Which ones have you seen? You can kind of view it from 2 lenses. Which ones have you seen others make, other than the list, or which ones have you made in the past? Who's brave enough to share some answers to what small talk mistake do you see people make the most? For me, I think one of the things that I notice a lot is exactly, and Eric popped it in there. Yeah, the pitch slapping. Yep. That's a dangerous one. I have to be really cautious of that myself. Yeah, James, excellent. Yeah, Candace, putting my foot in my mouth. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes that happens too. Yes, Amanda, waiting for someone else to take the lead. Yeah, definitely some challenges, some of that. Yeah, and these, it makes sense, right? Small talk doesn't come as naturally to some people than others, and sometimes just you don't know what to do in those situations, right? And so some of these challenges definitely come through. Well, before we jump into any of the tips and techniques, yeah, Juan, excellent. The language is a barrier. That makes it really hard, right? When you're trying to talk to someone and you're not really sure if you're going to be saying it the right way or saying the right things, it can be a huge challenge. It really limits the confidence in going and approaching people. So before we dive into some tips and techniques, and hopefully they help with some of these challenges that all of you have been talking about, or maybe some of you have, I want to talk about the dynamics of a conversation. Okay, so it's kind of some of psychology and science behind a conversation, because that's really what we're talking about, right? Small talk is a small conversation. And so when we're looking at the hidden heart of conversation, this is from Psychology Today. They talk about kind of the hidden heart of conversation. Really, when we're looking at these interactions that we have, it's really this kind of a social agreement that is out there, right? There's a social agreement that when I go and say something to you, you probably will say something back to me. That's just the way communication works. There's this idea that if I say something, and if it's something that is nice, then you'll probably react nicely. If it's something that's not nice, you'll probably not react nicely. You know, if I'm dealing with road rage and I yell something out of my car window at you, like that's probably the social agreement there is I'm kind of breaking that social agreement, or at least setting up a social disagreement on how we interact with each other in that context. But when we're thinking of that social agreement, it has these unspoken rules and conventions to it, right? We don't really say what these rules and conventions are. What we do is that, but they're there. And the ones I want to share with you here, just to kind of help set the tone for things, is this idea of relevance, quantity, quality, and manner. So in general, when we're having a conversation in this, and the social agreement behind it is that we try to have relevance. And what I mean by that is that we try to talk about things that connect to what was said before. Like when someone talks about their pet, we don't just suddenly like start talking about the weather, right? So, hey, oh yeah, you know, my dog, it like, you know, I got lost yesterday and it didn't come back. And then the next person, you know, after I say that said, yeah, it's really cold outside, and oh, that might actually relate if the dog's lost. But so let's make it even less obvious, right? Yeah, but how about that snow, right? Or right, like it's not really fitting the relevance of the conversation. So we know that when you're having a good conversation, there's that relevance factor. We also know there's a quantity factor. What I mean by quantity is the way that we share information. When we share information, we're often sharing enough information to be understood, but not too much information to overwhelm. It's like adding just the right ingredients to a recipe. So if someone would ask me, hey, like, how's your day going? I said, oh, like when I woke up this morning at 7 a.m., like, man, I had this sore back, and then I got out of bed, and like the shower took a long time for the shower to warm up. And man, took a while. I was a little bit frustrated by the end of that. And then I got out of the shower, and like I could go on all day, right? That's not really the quantity that question really was shooting for. So there's that unspoken rule that kind of fits in there. We also have a quality kind of rule or convention in regards to things. For example, we usually tell the truth and expect others to do the same. It's like making sure that our puzzle pieces fit together. I'll talk about why that sometimes doesn't happen shortly, but you know, we do expect certain quality to the conversations we have. And then we also have the manner of how we engage in conversations. You know, we speak clearly and directly unless there's a good reason not to. Think of it as talking the way that fits the situation, right? So if you were in a job interview, you might use a little more formal language. If you're hanging out with someone at the pub on a Friday night, you would use different language. If you're you know, jogging down the street side by side with someone, again, different way that you choose to speak to them. If it's a doctor, again, it would be different. If it's someone that you knew back in high school, but you've never seen them, you know, for the last 25 years, whatever the case is, that would change things too. So there's all these unspoken dynamics that are within these relationships that we have in these conversations. But we know that in the midst of some of those rules and conventions, there are some rule breaking times that happen, right? And when we are using the rule breaking strategically, that's when it works well. Sometimes we break the rules without even realizing we're breaking the rules, or when we're kind of going against conventions, and that can interrupt things in a weird way. But when you do it strategically, like, and we often do it and almost intentionally. So sometimes, for example, we don't always say what we mean in a conversation. This can be actually be a helpful strategy to be polite, showing empathy, or sharing more subtle information. I'll share a quick example for you, right? So let's say someone asks me, hey, how you doing, Ben? And I kind of say, hey, I'm fine. Right? That could be me kind of not being quite ready to tell you what's really going on. Right? So I'm not really being completely honest in those situations. Now, depending on how well I know you, perhaps I need to be more honest. But if you're someone who's more of an acquaintance, that's maybe where that quality of the conversation, that truth speaking side of things, maybe doesn't quite fit the rules or fit the conventions. So even within small talk, we have to be aware of how there's that engagement back and forth with people, right? Where we're talking about the relevant things, where we're trying to have the right kind of information when someone asks you, oh, tell me about your work, right? Again, if someone says, hey, tell me about your job, you're going to have a much different conversation if you're going high quantity versus low quantity. You got to find that in between as an example. Let me talk a little bit about using your cat. And no, I don't mean your pet, if you have a pet cat. What I mean by cat, and it relates to communication, CAT stands for the Communication Alignment Theory. And the Communication Alignment Theory relates to how we adjust, how we interact with others. And that can often be based on things like personality, status, and social background. So what I mean by that is that when we meet someone for the first time, or when we're connecting with someone, our subconscious and also our conscious tends to start to evaluate based on things like personality, status, and social background, and it influences how we interact back and forth. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is trying to build a little bit of a positive perception between each other. Because we know that when we build positive perceptions with the people that we're talking to, that is more beneficial for the ongoing relationship that we have. Now, if we're angry at someone, that's where that positive perception starts to get in the way. But when we're talking small talk, which is the lens that we're talking through here today, that positive perception, there is some value to that and how we want to engage with people. And so what we end up doing is that we start to accommodate and make adjustments based on some of those personality, status, social backgrounds, based on a desire for positive perception, and also based on the social outcomes that we're trying to push towards. So if you're ever in a networking event, one example of this that you can see is that people tend to match their energies with each other. If someone comes and they engage really energetically into the conversation, people tend to, even if they're not naturally energetic, start to mimic, not quite mimic, but adjust and accommodate how they connect with that person. So the next networking event you go to, look for how that happens. It's almost like this mirroring that ends up happening. But there's this risk of, do we over or under accommodate? Because that's when those negative perceptions can start to occur. So if someone's just kind of like, hey, how's it going? And you're like, man, I'm fantastic. It's been such a wonderful day. And like, whoa, like that could maybe blow that person away, right? Or vice versa, where you just kind of like zero energetic response to that person. So genuine accommodation, and accommodation isn't bad, but we want genuine accommodation where it's natural, where it's like unconscious in our brains, how we're accommodating based on different people. And successful conversations want to drive things towards those positive outcomes for both sides of the equation. So it's this huge, like the science of communication and conversation is huge. This is a very brief summary of it, because it just relates to how we can understand that when we're having those times where we need to have small talk, what's going on beneath the surface. And of course, we have to have the conversation around small talk, introvert versus extrovert, but I'm going to throw a twist in things because I'm going to put in ambivert in front of here too. So some of you may have never heard the term ambivert. Introvert, many of us are familiar with. Extrovert, many people are familiar with. Ambivert is someone who exhibits qualities of both introversion and extroversion. It's probably a better way of saying that it's more of a spectrum when it looks at introversion and extroversion, right? Because we want to know, like sometimes people are like, hey, I'm very drawn to people. I get energy from social gatherings and I'm fairly outgoing. That's more on the extrovert end of the spectrum. The introvert end of the spectrum is it's draining to be around lots of people. I prefer peace, solitude, and quiet time. I usually crave alone time in my free time. And then ambivert is kind of a mix of things. So here's a handy little chart that I won't go through it, but you can see that later. And of course, you're getting the slide deck later. But the ambivert, what's been found is that most people tend to be in that middle range. They actually have a mix, right, of whether how extroverted or how introverted they are. And this is some work done by Adam Grant. He's an associate professor at Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He analyzed a bunch of studies, and the relationship between extroversion and income was basically zero. Like there's all these different things they looked at. He actually did some personality surveys and collected 3 months of sales records from more than 300 salespeople, both male, female. And the people who ranked right in the middle for extroversion and introversion, ambiverts, they tended to be the best salespeople. They actually found that ambiverts pulled in 24% more revenue than introverts, and a mind-boggling 32% more revenue than extroverts. So Adam Grant theorized that ambiverts seem to strike that balance between the two more extreme personality traits. And he talked about it being the ambivert advantage. This tendency to be assertive and enthusiastic enough to persuade and close, but at the same time listening carefully to customers and avoiding the appearance of being overly confident or excited. Regardless of where you are in the spectrum, whether you call yourself an extrovert or an introvert, or whether you say, hey, I'm in that middle where I'm an ambivert, which is where I would say that I am, which might seem weird because I think a lot of people assume that I'm just like pure extrovert when I do these sessions and workshops and I come across with this energy and this outgoingness and things like that. I'm actually more in the middle of things. ultimately, though, the key thing is that whether it comes to however you want to describe things, we're actually more alike than we're different in many ways, because we still work through lots of the same types of challenges, maybe from one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum. So I want to do a quick little message for those of you who would be more on the extroverted end of the spectrum. Breathe sometimes, right? Avoid coming on too strong in those small talk conversations. Ask more questions. Be aware of oversharing. Don't assume what the other person is going to say, and kind of stick with the conversation, right? Stay on topic. I want to share another slide here, a little message for the introverts. And again, you're probably somewhere in between the two, but prepare conversation questions, right? So you may need to prepare a little bit ahead of time as to what you might want to ask. Choose your mindset and attitude. Curiosity is key, right? If you're not sure what to say, just ask a question. Oh, my dog, it was lost last night and was trying to find it. Oh, did you find it? Right? Like, just ask questions. Let the people talk a little bit more, but deepen the conversation. Like, what do you do? How did you enter that industry? What intrigues you with the industry that you work in? And you could be anywhere in the middle on those things. If, again, just as a reminder, if you have questions about things, definitely add them into the chat as we're going here. I'm going to take a quick little drink of my water before we get too much further and I get too dry. I'm not sure if there's been any specific questions that have come up here yet, but that's okay. I think Paul's tracking it for at the end. I can dive into any that do show up in there. Let's dive into some small talk tips, because this is where I want to make it relevant for you to kind of say, hey, what can I take from our time here today? I'm a big fan of being able to take one small step forward after you attend something like this and say, what am I going to do differently? And I think the key thing when we are trying to engage in more effective small talk is understanding how we can listen more effectively, right? Because that's a big portion of it. Because if I'm trying to engage in small talk with someone else and I'm listening poorly, that conversation isn't going to go very far. And so that's how I want to talk about listening a little bit. And this relates to small talk. This relates to any conversation that you're having with someone, right? So you think of the visual side of things, right? Giving cues, nod your head, make eye contact, etc. Like and this is a big one. Okay, I'm going to interrupt myself here. Let me pause for a second. Say, many of you might meet virtually in meetings. If your camera is not near where you look on your monitor, it looks like you don't care about the conversation. Okay, so there's a small talk tip. Have your camera close to where you are going to be looking on your monitor when you're engaged in a conversation online. It's just really strange I've had conversations with people who have their camera like off to the side, and it's like, oh, like, you're not even looking at me. I know it's virtual. I know that you are actually looking at me because you're looking at my video, but it makes a big difference because it gives you a chance to give those visual cues. And when you're having those meetings, you can nod your head, you can make eye contact, or at least virtually, you're making fake eye contact, but you know what I mean. That's huge when it comes to listening well. There's a story that talks about this 8-year-old boy named Nicholas, and he came home from school, bounded into the house, and started telling his dad about his great day at school. Dad, Nick said, I had a great day at school. We had art class today, and I painted a cool picture of the mountains. We played soccer during gym, and I scored a goal. And guess what? They served pizza for lunch. So Nicholas looks at his dad reading the newspaper, and he says to his dad, Dad, you're not listening to me. His dad looks up and says, yes, I am, son. You painted a picture of the mountains, you scored a goal in the soccer game, and you had pizza for lunch. Nicholas, unappeased, replies, no, Dad, that's not it. You're not listening to me with your eyes, right? Visual is a part of listening for sure. In fact, they say that one study talked about nonverbal communication accounted for over 65% of meaning when it came to interactions with others. So visually, how are you when you're at your next time where you're engaging in small talk? What's your body language? Is your body turned away from them? Are you nodding your head as they say things? Those are a couple things you may want to practice. Verbally is a huge part of how you can signal that you're listening and paying attention. If you want to show that you're interested in hearing more, you can say things like, tell me more. What can you share about that? If you want to show that you're empathizing, oh, that must have been tough. I can imagine how challenging that situation was for you, or I can't imagine how hard that must have been. If you want to show that you're clarifying, I'm not sure I'm clear on your feelings about XYZ. Can you help me understand your emotions regarding this? And then, of course, we also have the mental side of things as well. What I mean by that is effective conversations require focus and attentive mental engagement. because visual and verbal cues lose their significance if you're not tracking the conversation. And being a good conversation partner in small talk or in regular conversation means retaining information with the option to gracefully exit rather than displaying boredom or inattention, which can potentially damage relationships and communication, right? So we want to make sure we're engaged in those ways. So if you are a listener, here's a few tips for you. Be present, maintain good eye contact, smile, ask questions, validate responses, show interest, keep an open posture, and then visual, verbal, and mental listening is important as well. As we get close to our wrapping up our time here together, I want to talk about a few more things that are important. I'm not going to be able to cover everything. Some of the things you'll see in a slide deck might be something that I didn't cover here, but you'll be able to fill in the gaps as we go forward. Couple quick things, and a lot of this is based on a book, The Fine Art of Small Talk by Deborah Fine. Kind of funny. I'm pretty sure she intentionally called it The Fine Art of Small Talk, being named Fine. I think that's kind of funny. And she talks about some important categories that you might want to prepare yourself for when it comes to small talk, and how you can be ready to talk about things like family, occupation, recreation, or miscellaneous. The idea being that when we are ready for going to some kind of area at time where we know that there's going to be some small talk, if we put a little bit of time and intentionality into preparing either some questions we can ask or some stories we can tell or some examples from those kind of areas, it allows some very safe, trust-building engagements with others around us. So again, how's your family? Tell me about your work. Or maybe you say, hey, let me tell you a story about what happened at work today. You might have an interesting story that you might have prepared ahead of time. And it's okay to prepare ahead of time when you're doing those things. Really, the key thing is that you want to try to build the conversation topics that you're comfortable talking about. And that could be sports, books, hobbies, TV shows, and music, or movies, whatever the case might be, because it helps us to get ready for some of those conversations. And so she suggests to build your own conversation list. And we need to recognize that as we do that, that it allows us to recognize that we're all nervous at times, right? Everyone is nervous. Even those extroverts, they got to step out a little bit more than you might realize they're doing. Especially if most people are in the ambivert section. Again, like someone like me, like if you bump into me in a networking event, you might think that I'm just this natural extrovert. But hey, I approach some of those conversations with a little bit of nerves too. A little bit like I got to go and I got to go shake a hand and I got to say hi. That's not always easy. So the more we can prepare, the more confident we can become in those kind of situations. She talks about building your conversation muscle, listing some questions and starting conversations with a statement or an observation. Some of these might be a little bit cheesy, right? These are just some examples she gives. But the idea behind it is, and I hope you're trying to, building some of this idea in your head already, is to how can you prepare a little bit ahead of time? I love these events. What's your favorite event? I love this event. Like what do you love about it? Those kind of things can be simple little icebreaker kind of questions, right? Or hey, this is a great event. Is it your first time you've come here? Then you can have a little bit of a conversation around it. So as you're engaging in some of these events or some of these kind of times where you might have some small talk, just remember, even some simple things, knowing your audience, who you're talking to. If it's work colleagues, like again, you can have small talk in just in a meeting, right? Pre-meeting time. Know your audience. Who are they, right? The more you know them, the type of topics you can talk about, the better. If you're going to a business event, you might want to talk some business stuff. If you're going to a nonprofit event, you might want to talk about nonprofit stuff and kind of prepare yourself. But some of the key things that you can do, regardless of how comfortable you are with small talk: eye contact, smile, look for that approachable person. There's some of them in these kind of areas that you can see that they're pretty approachable. Give them your name and ask theirs. Right? Some really interesting things that you can, simple things you can do just to engage on the small talk side of things. I've got a bunch of sample kind of questions here. I'm not going to read them all back to you, but you can kind of see some of these, maybe at your business to work event, maybe at a social event, different things like that can really stand out to you. And then there's some just general icebreakers that you can look at as well and have an interesting conversation around those kind of things. As we wrap up, I want to share with you some ending small talk tips, right? When you're ending a conversation, try to end it on a positive note. What I mean by that, and you can see that is simple, just, hey, like one more thing before I go, X, Y, Z. And then they know that you're trying to wrap up the conversation rather than just walking away. That might be a handy little tip that you can use to do that. with people. You can also look at how you know when you want to end a conversation. And some of these things might be, hey, you ran out of things to say, so then you need that transition. Hey, one more thing before I go. Are you going to be at the next event that we're going to be having? One more thing before I go. Will I see you tomorrow at the meeting? Great. Okay, see ya. Right. Some quick little exit thing could be really helpful to end that awkward conversation at the end of things. And you may want to just kind of say, hey, nice talking to you. I'll leave you to go talk to someone else now. That's a really helpful thing at a networking event if you've ever went to one of those. Of course, the hybrid side of things, I mentioned it already a little bit. It's still important to learn how to engage in the virtual world. You don't want to just forget about the fact that small talk is still valuable. If you are on a team that is mostly virtual, and I work with a few clients who are mostly virtual, I talk to them about this all the time. How can you be very intentional about building some times of small talk? And if you are going into those meetings a few minutes early or at the beginning of your meetings, even if you spend a couple minutes just engaging in small talk, it actually really helps to build team culture. And so prepare some questions ahead of time, prepare some thoughts ahead of time around how you can engage in small talk. But you want to do some of the things like I talked about. Set up your camera and screen to make it look like you're looking at the person. If you can, turn on your do not disturb on your computer device that you have so you're not getting notifications. Because if you're talking to someone and they have notifications popping up, it's just like that visual cues if you were in person. If they kept pulling out their phone and looking at their phone as they're trying to have a conversation with them, that's not going to help them feel like they're able to engage deeper on things. I'm also a big fan when it comes to the hybrid world of small talk and communication and engagement and communication, embracing the power of headphones. So if you are meeting virtually with someone, the reason why headphones are so helpful is that it limits the work that whether it's Teams or Zoom has to do to cancel out that feedback from the sound coming through the speakers. So right now, if any of you would talk, I'd only hear it through my headphones, which means that my computer does not have to try to now cancel my microphone from giving feedback. So actually you get a much clearer conversation when you're doing that. So a little tip around that. I have, like I said earlier, I always want to leave people with a challenge for them to kind of embrace. And so when it comes to small talk, I want to give you 3 challenges to consider for you to try to stretch yourself when it comes to practicing small talk. Okay, so here's the 3 small talk challenges. And I'd love for you to pick one of these. And I'm going to ask you to put in the chat either number 1, number 2, or number 3, just because sometimes when we publicly commit to something, there's a more likely chance that we're actually going to engage in it. So here's the 3 challenges. 1, start a conversation with 3 new people this week. Okay, so that could be next time you're going through the grocery line saying, hey, how's your day going? That might be it, right? But it's flexing that muscle, building that muscle in your conversation. That's one challenge. Conversation or small talk challenge number 2. At your next meeting, show up a little bit early and ask someone a question. Not just like a yes or no question, right? We've talked about that. Some good questions. That's the second challenge, whether that's virtually or in person. And the third one, attend a networking event. Now, there just so happens to be a networking event tomorrow that World Trade Center is putting on. Paul will probably talk about that at the end of our time here together. Maybe you want to register for that and show up tomorrow for that networking event to practice some small talk. And if you are there, I'm planning on being there. Come say hi to me tomorrow and practice some small talk with me tomorrow. Out of those 3 challenges, which of those 3 are you going to be willing to commit to? I'd love to see a few people engage in there. See, there you go, Paul. Engaging there, number 2. Lots of number 2s. That might be the easiest one. You guys are all picking, oh, there we go. We got some 1s. There we go. Some 2s. Who's going to pick a 3 and show up tomorrow? That would be fun if you did a 3. Okay, we got a few people aiming for a few things. Good. Good to see Eric try to do 2. That'd be great if you could do that. Hey, there we go, Juan. Attend a networking event. If you're there tomorrow, come say hi to me, Juan. It'd be great. I also have one more quick slide that I didn't know if I'd show you this one. There's some more questions you may want to consider asking. Again, the slide deck will have all of these in there as well. As you kind of consider steps in your growth in developing small talk skills, I just want to invite you to consider some of the resources that I have to offer beyond me showing up this webinar. So there's some free leadership skills workshops you can reach out to me about. There's also a podcast, a CrestCom podcast. I am not the host of this podcast. I have a Cantera leadership podcast, and I'll give you the website for both those shortly. But if you want to scan that QR code either now or in the slide deck later, you can see some of what the podcast topics are that CrestCom puts out. We have some wonderful guests on there that talk about leadership and growth as well. But if you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, here's a few ways that you can do so. You can see my phone number on there. You can also see my email address for CrestCom and Cantera Leadership. So Cantera Leadership is kind of the parent company of the CrestCom program that I offer. CrestCom is an international company, but I partner with them on leadership development. So you can reach me at any of those resources that you see there on the screen. But I will want to encourage you, don't just put that number in the chat and do nothing about it. As we wrap up our time here together, take a step, practice your small talk, flex that muscle, grow that muscle, and see how you can become more effective at building your small talk skills. If there's any questions or comments or anything like that, feel free to let me know as we wrap our time up.
Awesome, awesome presentation, Ben. Got a lot of good takeaways there. Yeah, like something that kind of popped to mind and really stand out for me is just being curious, I think. I think that's really important and often overlooked. You might, as opposed to trying to drive the conversation, you can nudge it just by asking, tell me more about that. Or, if you're on a Zoom call and you see that, maybe your colleague, they have a cat that walks by, ask them about their cat. Like just like little things about that, or you see that they have a plant in their room, right? Just like little things like that can help form those bonds. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the raise your hand feature if you want to ask, or you could drop them in the chats. I believe Ada had one. It is very hard to deepen a conversation when you are not curious about that person. Any solution?
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, there, I see it in there. Yeah, sometimes you just have to force yourself to be a little more curious, right? So, because again, you have to think of those social norms that we have, right? Where it's a game of tennis, a little bit back and forth. So if you're not curious, one of two things is either going to happen. Well, most likely one thing is going to happen. The conversation is going to end. Now, if you want it to end, great, right? Like not being curious didn't hurt you. But if you feel like there's value in having a little bit of that game of tennis going on because you want to try to build value for each other and kind of build that connection, have good positive social outcomes, you might have to practice being a little more curious. So there's no real solution other than, hey, I gotta try anyway. Have a few curiosity questions kind of in your back of your head that you might be able to ask.
Yeah, no, that's a good tip. And I mean, we're not supposed to like everyone, right? There's just some people that I don't think we're meant to click with. And if that's the case, then you can move on. But as you said, Ben, like you can always, if you find that there is value and it's a conversation that needs to happen, just have a be curious. Arif has a question. Joyce has a question. What should I do when someone interrupts my conversation? Oh, that's a great one.
Well, I won't claim that I'm a conversation expert, so I'll say a few thoughts here, but I wouldn't say that I have the perfect answer around this. I think that it depending on what's being interrupted, but I think the key thing is that you still want to engage as an active listener is kind of the key thing, right? So if someone interrupts you and they're starting to talk about something, still be like, okay, actively listen. And if there was something that you were trying to say that you think still would have value, you can always go back to that and say, hey, you remember what just to finish my thought from earlier, I wanted to say this, or just to finish my thought from earlier. But sometimes people just interrupt because we're all learning, right? We're all learning how to engage in conversations. Some people are not really good at having a conversation without interrupting. And you may just have to release some of those things that you thought you had to say or that you wanted to say. And if they ask about it later, great. If they don't ask about it, you might have just not been able to share it. That's just that other person has to learn too, right? You're both learning.
For sure. And I guess it's one thing if this is like the cashier at the grocery store interrupting you versus a colleague that you've been working with for 10 years and they constantly keep interrupting you,
right.
Then maybe that's a conversation around boundaries or something, right? Or whatnot. Juan, just a comment here. Excellent tips for introverts to improve and practice conversations with anyone. And that's awesome. Yeah. I like how you mentioned the ambivert because I've always been like, I'm not an extrovert, but I'm not an introvert. I think there's got to be like somewhere in between where I fit. So you've gave me a bucket I can fit in, Ben. So I'm grateful
Yeah.
there.
And I have to let me just say one thing around that, because I think the statistic was, and I have to, I don't have it here in front of me, but I think Daniel Pink was the guy who I first read about ambiverts from. He talks about like 80% of people are more in that ambivert kind of middle ground. If you are going to kind of put labels on people, most people would be in the ambivert label.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so true in most. I think in most aspects of life, there's this gray area. But
Yeah.
we're so it's so easy to fall into the extremes. We're either this or that, right? So
Yeah.
that's a good point. I don't think we have any more questions. So that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Awesome presentation again, Ben. I got some good takeaways from you, and looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Really good to be part of this and encourage you in your journey.
Yes. Okay. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Take care. Have a great day.